Hello and welcome to the special support section of Melee's Turn Wheel. I'm your host, I'm a Melee Kirby, and today we're taking a look at Elfin, Larum, Dorothy, Saul, and Yoder from Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. If I seem a little quiet, that's because it is fairly late and I am pretty tired, but I am muscling through because I've been putting off recording these last couple of SSS episodes for way too long. And at this rate, I'm not going to be done with FE6 by the time I was hoping to be. So I am just making sure that I get something out. I'm going to try to make sure that it's up to the same standard of quality, of course. But yeah, if I seem a little under the weather, that's probably why I've been really tired the past couple of weeks. But it is what it is. I'm sure I'll I'm already starting to feel myself perk back up now that I'm starting to get back into the swing of it. So that's good. All right, now this time we're going to be looking at a couple of Etrurian characters, Larum and Elfin, but then also some of the St. Elimine Church characters, Dorothy, Saul, and Yoder. So let's go ahead and start with Elfin, who in some ways is honestly kind of the least interesting character I want to talk about today. He has supports with Douglas, Cecilia, Percival, Klein, and Faye. So I'm not going to focus too much on any individual supports. In fact, I think most of his individual supports are pretty mundane. I think the Faye support is very cute. And I think the Klein support is pretty entertaining. All of them have different qualities. I like all of them to a certain extent. But I don't think that any of these supports really say that much about his overarching character that I haven't really touched on in other SSS episodes so far. So what I mean by that is I would say Elfin's core characteristics are defined by his willingness to help others, his relationship with his father, and his relationship with Etruria in general. He was the Prince of Etruria, obviously. In case you need a refresher on who he is, I guess he's the Prince of Etruria. He was assassinated he was assassinated. Now he's a ghost. There was an assassination attempt on his life that left him injured, but he managed to escape with his life and was hiding away on the Western Isles. On the Western Isles, he encountered the rebellion and kind of took up arms against Etruria, and that's where Roy meets him. So, in a sense, he has this interesting position of being an Etrurian prince who openly and willingly fought against Etruria, but needing to hide his identity, obviously, because of a fear of assassination, which is interesting. That's a really cool concept for a character, and I would have loved to see that fleshed out more. And they touch on it, they bring it up a couple times, but they don't do that much with it. I would have loved to see more from this angle, because a lot of the time it's really just like they bring it up a couple times in a couple supports and then it's just dropped, and then they don't talk about much about what he plans to do after, or if they do talk about what he plans to do after, it's just go back to Etruria. And I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm speaking broadly, but I guess we can focus in on a couple of individual supports. So the client support, I know I said I wasn't going to focus in on any individual supports, but I'm going to keep this brief. The client support is just him and Klein reminiscing on their past together. This is a pretty funny support for Klein that I think says a lot about his character. But for Elfin's part, the only thing I can really say that it contributes to him is that Elfin is a very laid-back individual who doesn't stand on circumstance very much. Klein is very straightforward with him, especially as a child, and Elfin doesn't mind. He is very open to being treated as a peer rather than as a authority figure, which is cool. I think that's in line with what we've seen of him so far, what we know of him from the story. He's a nice guy. He doesn't abuse his power at all, obviously, and in fact, seeing other people do it seems to really bother him. So that all lines up. The Percival support starts to touch on something interesting, because Elfin's father, the king of Etruria, does not know that Elfin is alive. Even the king is unaware that Elfin is alive, and as a result, when Elfin supposedly died, he fell into a deep, serious depression. Now, Elfin is alive, obviously, So the logical conclusion would be to tell his father so that his father can cheer up and maybe even do a better job being king, because that's kind of a conflict right now, is that he's so emotionally, distraught that he's very easy to take advantage of, and that's kind of how the coup in Etruria really got into full swing. But Elfin doesn't want to do that because he feels that if he were to reveal himself to his father and make the fact that he is still alive public knowledge, he's just going to get assassinated again, or someone's going to attempt to assassinate him again. Instead, he says that he needs to focus on addressing the cause of the grief and of the corruption, and that's cool. He wants to do something about the corruption in Etruria, but then they don't go anywhere with it. They don't say anything about how they might do that or what that might look like. All he says is that eventually he's going to return to Etruria. That's boring. We already knew that. It's pretty obvious. The Cecilia one fucking sucks because it takes, unlike all the others, it takes him 2 support levels to even get around to revealing that he is Elfin. Cecilia suspects in the C support, but Elfin does not tell her for some reason, even though he tells Klein immediately. I don't get that one. But yeah, that means that 2 support levels need to be dedicated to Cecilia figuring out that he is in fact Elfin, or that what is his name, Mirden. And then the A support is just him saying that he'll come back to Etruria. Again, nothing interesting there. The face support, again, is cute, but doesn't really tell me anything about his character. So we're just going to skip over that one. The only support that I would say comes close to legitimately addressing Elfin's feelings and talking about what he wants to do going forward is the Douglas support. He tells Douglas that he's not sure if he even wants to return to Etruria because of the corruption that he's seen. And he feels like he's seeing Roy put in all of this work to make the world a better place and bring peace to the world. And he sees that as a source of inspiration and wants to do something similar, which is cool. I like that. But then, again, they just don't go anywhere with it. So it's a repeated pattern of this interesting idea, which I think Elfin is a character with a lot of potential. And they build on it a little bit in a couple of supports, and then nothing. I would have loved to see a support between him and Douglas where he talks about how he might go about, going from place to place, Etrurian territories, making sure, living as a common man to make sure that the people are being treated properly. Especially, this is a very common theme in the previous 2 games, is that the ruling class needs to form a sense of solidarity with the ruled, the common man, in order to make sure that they're doing a good job. Seliph gets told that a few times. Leaf gets told that a few times by August. And there's not really anything like that in FE6, which is fine. Not every story needs to be about the same things. But this could have been a good way to make sure that theme is still being explored, because I think it's a good theme. And they kind of touch on it a little bit, but it doesn't go far enough, in my opinion. So anyway, maybe I'm just being a sourpuss and missing the whole point of this support chain, and that he's actually the best character in the game. But honestly, I'd say maybe probably my least favorite character this episode, unfortunately, but I could be wrong. Maybe I'll remember how bad Dorothy is or whatever. Okay, next up we have Larum. Larum has 7 support partners. Holy moly. Roy, OJ, Geese, Echidna, Percival, Garrett, and Douglas. I'm going to keep this one brief because I do like Larum, but she is pretty much a pure comedy character, and most of the supports don't do a lot for her. Some of them do a good amount for other characters. I like her Geese support quite a lot in that regard. But for the most part, it's just she's goofy, she's silly, she's fun, and a lot of characters bounce off of her very well. She has a huge crush on Roy, and that's the source of a lot of great comedy. I think the geese support in particular, where she like pretends to be Roy, and they like go back and forth with herself in a conversation where she pretends to be Roy. It's very funny. I think the most generous read of her character that you can, like, if you wanted to say anything interesting about her character, I think the best you could do is that she has a lot of stuff in here about cheering people up, making people happy, what it means to be an entertainer, like in her conversation with Garrett. And ultimately, you know, you could even almost take away the impression that maybe she's doing it to a certain extent on purpose. You know, maybe she's playing it up a little bit to make people laugh, and you know, she's playing into the character a little bit. I mean, that's headcanon, obviously, but I think it's worth considering because at the end of the day, she's an entertainer. She wants people to be happy, and dancing and making people laugh and smile is the way that she has found to contribute to the war effort. You know, she can't fight, she can't use a lance or a sword or an axe, but she can dance, and that individual contribution is something that she's quite proud of. That's the impression I get, at least. They don't really do anything with that, but it's fine. You know, not every character needs to be amazingly complex. This is a good example of a simple character who I think is pretty good. I do want to focus on two specific supports, though. One of them is the Douglas support. She has a very sweet support with Douglas. I did talk about this one in the Douglas episode because I liked it quite a bit. And in that episode, I mentioned that Douglas has a really cute scene where he eats one of Larum's lunches in the middle of the battlefield. You know, like she made him a lunch, and he's like, oh, I don't know if I should eat it, but he's like, oh, you know, I'm gonna eat my daughter's lunch that she made for me. It's very sweet, very cute, and I still get that impression. He's a very, very wholesome dad character. But what I think is interesting, and I think this is a great example of why it's important to look at all these characters from multiple different perspectives, because I didn't even, when I did that episode from the perspective of Douglas, I did not even consider anything beyond that. But then now, doing this Larum support episode, I read the Echidna support, where Echidna kind of pokes fun at her about how bad her cooking is. Apparently it's so bad that it's like put people out of commission before, which adds a new layer of depth to that Douglas support. You know, seeing it's one of the biggest arguments, I think, against the limited support system, the way that it's currently set up, because to see both the Echidna and the Douglas support is so hard, and you're not going to be able to max out either. Although I guess you don't need to max out the Douglas support to see the scene where he eats her food. But I that support in isolation is good, obviously, but it's made better in the context of other aspects of her character, which is something we've seen a couple times. It's nothing, groundbreaking or anything, but I think this is kind of one of the it's kind of distilled here to its purest form. I think it's very easy to demonstrate with the support chain. I think basically her food is so bad, and it leaves you wondering whether Douglas is just being nice, or if he legitimately enjoys her food, unlike most other people. Or maybe something about cooking for him brings out brings out her skills in the kitchen more, and she's able to make better food because she cares about him so much. Any of those three possibilities, or maybe some that I hadn't considered, I think add a lot of layers to her character, and the fact that we don't know, it's up for interpretation, I think is awesome. So. Good supports overall. I like Larum. I think she's pretty funny. Okay, moving on to the Saint Elimine characters. Let's start with Saul. Now, Saul is the womanizer character of this game. There's one in just about every game. In FE4, it was Lewin. Sometimes there's more than one. FE4 was Lewin. FE5 was Homer and kind of Shanam. Although we didn't see that side of him very much. Pretty much all of his supports are played for comedy. With him either hitting on a woman or someone talking to him about hitting on a woman, and that being the source of comedy. I think these characters are maybe a little bit antiquated, and maybe antiquated is the wrong word, but they certainly they wear out their welcome. I think after however many games, I think Three Houses really did the trope justice for the first time in a while by kind of examining, not that it makes it okay, but examining the reasons why Sylvain is the way he is, and doing it for more than just comedy. But for the most part, I think it's a pretty boring trope. Not necessarily bad, but doesn't usually have a lot of depth or a lot of meat to chew on, and I don't think this is an exception. I think the majority of these supports are pretty one-dimensional. They sometimes do a fair bit for the other character, like I think his Dorothy support is great for Dorothy. We'll talk about that one in a little while, but I think these can all be boiled down to Saul flirts with some women, someone complains about it, or if the support partner is the one who he's flirting with, they might play along, they might be naive, they might, whatever it may be. What I think is fun, there's two things I want to point out about those types of supports for him. First of all, I think it's funny that it's working, kind of. So he a common defense that he employs for his actions is that he is spreading the word of God. And he feels that this is the most effective method. And in a sense, he's right. There has been a significant increase of young women becoming, interested in religion, which, I think maybe the numbers are a little bit skewed there. But I think that's funny. You can read maybe more people are interested in Saul than might be implied from reading his supports, because if you read his supports, it sounds like maybe they're not exactly, no one's taken the bait, basically. I guess if you want to be a little bit darker about it, then you can assume that maybe a lot of them are like Ellen too, or they're just too naive to understand what he's doing. But I don't like that interpretation. That makes me sad. So we're gonna stick with the first one. I think the other thing that I kind of would have liked them to expand on more for Saul, but there's a moment in the Ellen support where actually, yeah, I guess that kind of contradicts what I just said anyway. So that works out. Basically, he's flirting with Ellen, and Ellen does not get it. It just goes completely over her head. She has no idea what he's talking about, and assumes that he legitimately just wants to talk about the Bible or whatever the fuck. And he says, she says, I'd love to meet up with you. Should we set up a time now? And he's like, are you serious? And Saul says, but if you accept so easily, there's no satisfaction, which I think is very funny. He's an asshole. I'm not saying this is good behavior, but I think it's funny that he's more invested in the act of flirting and the act of trying to get someone's affection than he is in actually being with that person and actually getting results from that behavior. So, I think he's a jackass, but I think it's funny. Okay. Now, the Dorothy support I said is pretty good, but I would say it's mostly for Dorothy, so we'll talk about that later. The one that I want to focus on, and this is one that we talked about a while ago, the Igreen Saul support, which is essentially, I talked a fair bit about it in that episode. I'm not going to spend too much time on it here, but it's a nice little conversation that they have about religion. Igreen is an atheist because of a lot of terrible things that have happened in her life, and Saul obviously is not an atheist. And they talk about that a little bit. They talk about some of the morality behind religion. It employs the very, it's a very simplistic religious debate that, you could see anywhere. It's like baby's first religious discussion. Not to say that there's not value in having discussions like that. I'm just saying, it doesn't engage in any high level theological debate or anything like that. Basically, it boils down to Igreen saying, if there is a God, then why do bad things happen to good people? And Saul's response to that is basically, that is an understandable question. I respect the fact that you're unsure of that, and that your faith is not as strong as it could otherwise be. He doesn't dismiss her, which is great. He's legitimately responsive to what she has to say. And he basically says, because God believes that we should have control over our own actions, God wants us to have free will. So because of that, there are bad people. but he knows that we can overcome that and make our way towards living in peace and harmony. And I think both sides have merit. Just getting a bit personal for a second, I don't really. I'm agnostic. I would lean towards not believing in God, but that's not really like I don't care. Basically, is where I come down on it. If God's real, awesome. If he's not, I don't. It doesn't make a difference to me. It doesn't have any impact in the way that I choose to live my life. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about it. But I think that the people who don't believe in God for reasons like this or for other reasons are completely valid. And I think the people who do believe in God for reasons that Saul does are also completely valid. Just don't, on either side, because there is some of this on the side of atheism as well. Don't use that less. I'll admit, I'm not trying to both sides, this issue. But people are just assholes. Just don't be an asshole, basically. Whether you believe in God or not, just be nice to people, and don't dismiss their ideas out of hand because they don't believe in the same thing that you do. I think that's pretty basic, but unfortunately, some people don't really seem to quite understand that. So, anyway, I'll get off my soapbox for a minute, and just say that I like the support. I think especially important, and cool about the support is that by the end, Green does not change her mind. He talks to her. He gives her his perspective on the issue, and by the end of it, she says, I still don't believe in God, but you have given me a new perspective that I appreciate and that I think I respect it, and that's cool. This is a legitimately good support, and one that I think is uncharacteristically interesting. I mean, there's still plenty of flirting, because Green is really hot. Like, holy shit, she's very, very hot. But, yeah, Saul manages to put that aside and have an interesting conversation with her, which I think is cool. Okay, Dorothy. Dorothy supports. I didn't mention who Saul supports, by the way. Saul supports Ellen, Dorothy, Cecilia, Green, and Yoder. Meanwhile, Dorothy supports Saul, Yoder, Percival, Shin, and Clarine. Some of these supports are very mediocre. I think the Shin support is, honestly, that's pretty much the only one. It does still kind of contribute to the overall point, though. Dorothy has very, very low self-esteem. She considers herself, I mean, she doesn't explicitly say most of this, but you can kind of infer from the way she interacts with others. She considers herself ugly. She considers herself incompetent in combat. She considers herself to be an incompetent follower of her religion. And that stuff is very disheartening to her. And others try to pull her out of that mindset and teach her that she should have confidence in herself. The Clarine support, particularly good example. Clarine tries to give her a makeover, and it doesn't go super well. And Dorothy's very down on herself. She says, your baseline is so bad that it's no wonder that you can't make me look nice. And she says, well, shut the fuck up. If you keep talking like that, you're never the thing that matters more than any external factors is confidence, and that's gonna make more difference than any makeup I can put on you. In the Saul support, Dorothy gives Saul a hard time about flirting with so many women, as most of his supports are about. But what I think makes the Dorothy one interesting and a little sad, is that Dorothy seems a bit left out of the whole thing. He is constantly flirting with women, and yet he has never flirted with her. She doesn't say that out loud, but that seems to be the implication. He does not, and even by the end of the support, he still does not see her as worth flirting with, which I think is, I think you could read that in a couple different ways, depending on how generous you want to be to Saul. In the very, very generous read, you could say that he respects her too much, and that she's the one person he won't do this with because he feels like she deserves better than that. On the more realistic end of the spectrum, so let me be completely straightforward here, upfront. That's the word I'm looking for. Let me be completely upfront. Dorothy is not ugly by any means. I mean, her in-game portrait kind of makes it seem like she's not conventionally attractive, but if you look at her official art, she's honestly pretty cute. It's not that would matter anyway, but you know what I'm saying. It's not like she's particularly ugly, at least not in my opinion, by conventional standards. So, but I think we're supposed to feel like she is. I think that's supposed to be the implication, which is shitty, right? And I mean, maybe that's just more about Saul being a piece of shit than it is about Dorothy being ugly, but I think that that's kind of the vibe we're supposed to get, is that he legitimately just does not see her as attractive enough to support or to flirt with her. So yeah, I think it's an alright support. I think it characterizes, it's a weird support where it characterizes them both very well, just not in ways that I think are good. I think it characterizes Saul as being shitty. I think it characterizes Dorothy as like most of her supports do, like being very self-conscious about her appearance and not wanting to feel like she's unattractive. So the Shin support is really boring. It's just her working up the courage to talk to Shin. That's all. Again, confidence, I guess. Not just confidence in herself, but confidence in her appearance, but confidence in the way she acts and behaves as well. Same thing with the Percival support, although this one is a lot more fleshed out. Percival guiding her, helping her to improve her skills on the battlefield, and her being really receptive to that and genuinely improving. She is a character that is very receptive to what other people have to say about her, for better or for worse. It makes her, very impressionable. It makes her, it would be very easy to tear down her self-esteem if you wanted to, but it also means that she is a very quick learner and is willing to seek out the advice of people who she feels are, kind of mentor figures, which is a good thing as far as I'm concerned. And last but certainly not least, we have the Yoder support, which I think is just a lovely support. I think it's actually not only Dorothy's best support, but one of Yoder's best supports as well. Essentially, Dorothy is approaching Yoder because she feels like she's not doing a good enough job as a follower of Saint Elimine. And she's self-conscious about that. So she's talking to Yoder about how she might, go about improving herself to become a better servant of the church. It's a pretty basic moral lesson. Yoder tells her a little story. It's like a religious tale. One of those old moral religious stories that we have in our own world about that to teach kids lessons in ways that they can understand and things like that. So the story that he tells Dorothy is one of I think it's an owl. I have it right in front of me, but I don't want to spend a bunch of time reading it. But I'm going to try to do it off of memory. An owl and an eagle or a hawk or something like it's an eagle. Both want to fly up to heaven, and the owl can't do it because its wings are too weak, and the eagle can't do it because its eyes aren't good enough to see all the way to heaven. But when they work together, the eagle's strong wings and the owl's powerful eyes, they can make the journey together. And it's just a lesson about how different people are good at different things. And instead of trying to be something you're not and giving up because it won't work, you should try to work together to complement each other, which is a good lesson, I think. I mean, people have taken it very far and in bad directions, but I think at its core, it's a good thing to teach people, especially kids. Sometimes it's better to work together than to try to do everything yourself. That's a pretty basic lesson I think most of us can get behind. Oh, and that interpretation that I just gave, I paraphrased the story and gave what I thought it was about, but there's a nice little bit at the end here where Dorothy, maybe a little bit slow on the uptake, if I'm going to be honest, no offense, Dorothy, but she tells him that she doesn't really get it, and she asks him to explain the point of the story, the meaning of the story, and he says that he can't do that because she needs to figure it out on her own, and that everybody's interpretation of a story is going to be different, and that you should strive to come to your own conclusions, which again I think is a pretty good lesson to learn, even if I think the lesson of the story is pretty obvious, which, I mean, maybe someone else can have a different interpretation. I don't know. And then he continues the story, which is a nice way to end the support. So yeah, good support. I think Dorothy is a good character overall. She is a really, really low self-esteem person, and she struggles with that. But it also means that she is particularly hard on herself, very eager to learn, and receptive to what other people have to say, which can be a good thing under certain circumstances. I like how they this is something that a lot of characters in the older games do. Less so kind of in the newer games, especially like Awakening and Fates. But they'll take an idea for a character. They'll take a concept, like a personality trait or a gimmick, quote unquote, and they'll explore that idea from multiple different angles. Which I feel like in the newer games, maybe I'm stereotyping a little bit too much, but I feel like in the newer games they just repeat those same angles over and over again. But I feel like in the case of Dorothy, you take a girl who is maybe less conventionally attractive than a lot of the other women in the army, and has a lot of self-confidence issues. And I can imagine someone like Dorothy walking out of a 3DS game, Awakening or Fates, and having those be her central gimmicks. And I am just imagining every support being exactly the same, where someone makes fun of her for being ugly or tells her that she's not ugly and that she have more confidence in herself. That's fine too. Well, it's not fine. That's a possible angle that they might go for as well. But I feel like in the older games, just as a rule, they tended to be a little bit more diverse in the way that they approached the character concepts. And again, I haven't played the newer games in a while. It's been quite a long time since I played Awakening and Fates. But I feel that's the impression that I always got from those games. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, though. Who knows? Okay, and finally for today, we have Yoder. I say for today, I'm probably going to end up uploading like 4 episodes on the same day, so you might have plenty to listen to. But the last for this episode is Yoder. Yoder has 5 support partners. He has Saul, Dorothy, Milady, Nime, and Diane. And we have actually seen all of these supports already. This is the first character, which makes sense, is the second to last episode. In fact, I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner, where we've seen all of his support partners already in previous episodes, or in this episode, I suppose. So, I'm not going to go through all of them individually, because I think that they all kind of boil down to the same thing. So this is going to be pretty short, even though I do like Yoder. Yoder's actually one of my favorite characters in the game. In fact, I don't feel this way anymore, spoilers, but for a while, I probably would have said that he's my favorite character in the game. I really like the older characters in Fire Emblem. I think they're so cool. They have such great angles for storytelling with, certain perspectives and things like that, and I think Yoder is no exception. I really like him. He's not my favorite character in the game anymore, but he's still probably in my top 5. And that's awesome. But I think his supports do, maybe I'm being a little bit hypocritical here because I just complained about this, but I think in this case it works. Most of his supports are basically the same thing, which is that Yoder is an old man, he is a man of God, and he is very smart, very wise, and very kind, and he takes those qualities and uses them to help others. In the Saul support, it's mostly played for laughs, but he is giving him legitimate guidance on how to be a good priest and how not to be a good priest, which I think is good. I already explained him giving Dorothy lessons in the Yoder in her support with him, and I think that his insistence that everybody is going to come to their own conclusions instead of just giving her the answer that she wants to hear, I think is awesome and is a lot more characterful than him just explaining the moral of the story, which is cool. Again, even if the moral of the story is, in my opinion, pretty obvious. In his Milady support, he assuages some of her fears and convinces her that her wyvern is, wants to be here, is fighting of her own free will, and cheers Milady up substantially. The Nime support is an excellent support between 2 people who drifted apart in their life and are trying to come back together into it. Their paths are intersecting once more, as they would put it, or something like that. Great support, but I've already kind of gone on a whole bit about. I think that this one is maybe worth a little bit more scrutiny, just because I think it's interesting to see young Yoder was seemingly just as benevolent. I mean, there were a group of people who supposedly killed his own sister, and we don't have any context for this, so maybe it's a little bit less unreasonable than I'm going to make it sound, but he was just going to let him go. He was going to say, forget and forgive. I'm sure he is traumatized by that and is going to carry that with him for the rest of his life, but he did not want revenge. He did not want to kill them, which I think it would be very reasonable for anyone in his position to want, especially, modern era, we can at least expect, for the most part, people who do those things to be brought to justice in some way or another. These guys are, like Nime says, they might go out and do it again. So, is it more just, in that case, to stop them by force, maybe even kill them, if that's what it takes? I don't know. I think that's a legitimately interesting moral question that Yoder and Nime debated about and are still debating about. Although, nowadays, they see things a little bit more... They are able to respect the other's perspective more than previously. And then the Saul and the Yoder and Diane support is a nice leaning on the fourth wall a little bit about the affinity system and explaining that in terms and using it as a great bridge between two characters who are on the older side and teaching a nice little lesson about how it's important to respect each other's differences and come together over our similarities, which, again, not a complicated moral theme for a game ostensibly aimed at teenagers, but it's not bad, It's definitely a good thing to believe in. At least I believe so. A lot of these moral questions are pretty simple. I think the Nime Yoder one is legitimately interesting and one that I think is worth discussing. Maybe worth discussing is the wrong word. I don't know how practically applicable it would be in today's world, but it just as a thought experiment, I think Nime and Yoder's question is legitimately still interesting and still worth discussing. But most of the moral lessons that Yoder is teaching are things that I think most teenagers already know, at least on paper. Whether they actually do it or not is a different story, of course. Anyway, yeah, maybe I'm underselling it, actually, because I was a fucking idiot when I was a teenager. I think most of us were. So maybe this is a good thing. Maybe I'm underselling it a little bit. But anyway, that's all I have for Yoder, and that's all I have for everybody. My favorite character this episode, definitely Yoder, as I said. He's in my top 5 favorite characters in the game, probably. I would have to sit down and do it all out. Of course, next main episode... no, not next main episode. 2 main episodes from now. The FE6 wrap-up episode, I will tell you who my favorite character is. So, and we still have one more SSS episode. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Next SSS episode, we're going to be doing Gonzalez, Echidna, Karel, Fur, and Bartray. I'm going to give you my favorite character out of those 5, and then I'll recap who all my favorite characters have been in each of the past episodes. And from there, you guys can guess who you think mine is. But, we'll have to see. Okay, I think that's all that I had. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.